Alright guys, welcome back. We're going to start taking the valve body off of this thing. You can see I already got it off now, but that's what we're going to do in this video. I'll show you how I'm taking it off and how we're going to do some of the electrical testing and inspection type items. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Stick around for a while. Let's get to this thing. You got a couple electronic items here. We have a couple solenoids. This is solenoid A, solenoid B. This is like the 1-2 upshift solenoid. This is the 2-3. These serve different functions in all of the gears. This is the pressure control valve, and there's a valve here for the torque converter clutch. Pull all that stuff out of the way. First thing I'm going to do is go through and undo all these bolts here. There is a whole bunch of 10mm bolts, and then there is some 8mm bolts on top of this pressure switch assembly. I'm going to go through right now and unbolt all these. This tube here goes back to the tail housing. This is what lubricates the back end. I'm gonna get this thing out of the way so I can get to this bolt down here. This pressure switch assembly, we'll undo the plug here. Just pull in on these little clippies, pull them out, and then we're gonna want to twist this right here, and then it'll break free. We'll go ahead and remove the wiring harness. This is the A solenoid plug. This is the B solenoid plug. I already have them unclipped, but this one is the torque converter clutch. And here is the pressure control. So I'm going to pull this off to the side. We can hang it off to the side like this, or we can pull the harness completely out. I was just using a big socket to slip over the outside. This plug has these 4 clips on the outside that clip onto the case. I just ran this over to the side and then kind of twisted it and wiggled, and then it pushes it back out. So next we have, now that we got all of the bolts out, we have this little roller jiggy here. It's bent, keeps downward pressure on your gear selector detent. So if you listen to this, that's what you're actually hearing when you're shifting. So that noise you're hearing, that's that little detent when you're shifting. So one thing to watch out for is this unit here actually has a little pin that catches onto this valve. This is your manual valve for the valve body. This is what's basically making the selection and changing the hydraulic fluid passages inside based on the gear position. So when you're moving this manual valve, it's changing the fluid passages to go to this pressure switch, and then that pressure switch is making the decision based on the fluid pressure on how to activate certain valves based on engine speed, RPM. So now that we have all of the bolts out, I'm going to lift up this valve body and make sure that it's going to come out. Just going to lift straight up. I will be replacing the gasket either way. Some of this fluid in here actually looks pretty nasty. It looks like there's metal shavings in some of it, and it's kind of goopy and nasty. So a little bit more about this parking linkage here. You can see that this is connected over to this rod that goes to the back of the transmission. So if I push this all the way this direction, which would be in the park position, you can see it compress this spring. And this is actually what is going to be locking your transmission into the park position. So when I compress the spring, if you listen, now that just locked into position. So now this internal gear here won't turn at all. And that's when you actually click and lock into your park position. So I'll show that again. You can see down the gear down in there. I lock this into the park position, rotate. Now it locks into place. Now you're in park. So next there's gonna be 8 little check balls in here. There's one here, 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 and here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna use a little neo magnet, and I'm just gonna go through and pull all of these check balls out of here. So I got all 8 balls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 on the other side, and I might even just leave them connected to the magnet over on the bench. We also have to take this reverse band servo off. All right, so you're gonna have, after you get all the check balls out, you're gonna have 2 little bolts here. These bolts are hollow, they have holes in them. They also serve as oil passages. This is gonna be a Torx, I believe this is a T40 Torx. And then this one is going to be a 3/8 12 point. Alright, so I'm going to save these bolts. The rebuild kits usually come with these 2 bolts, but I'm going to save them just in case. Now that we have the check balls and the bolts out, I'm going to go ahead and take this reverse band servo out of here. This is also going to be 10 millimeter. I'm just going to take all the bolts out, pop this guy loose. Wow, that's dirty inside there. Put all the bolts in there. This gasket is not reusable, so the kit should come with one of these. Take this guy very gently and twist and pull off. There's a whole bunch of junk in there. Pretty dirty. So I'm just gonna put this back like this, set it off to the side, pull this out, and there's just a spring inside here. Set this off to the side. So now I'm gonna stand it up and let all this fluid drain out of here. That should be fun. Alright, so now I'm just gonna let that drain. Okay, so next I wanna do the testing of the electrical components inside the valve body. So I'm going to check the A and B solenoids. These should be between 20 and 40 ohms. We have 20.2 on the A solenoid. .5 on the B solenoid. And we'll check the torque converter, clutch, valve. It should be between 10 to 17, I believe. That's at 10.2, that is good. And then for the pressure control, that should be between 4 and 5. And that's at 4 ohms. So all of the electronics inside the valve body are good. Next thing we want to check is this pressure switch. So what we have here is a bunch of little switches. So these are all little membrane switches, and you can see there's electrical contacts on the outside. So as you move the manual valve with the shifter, it redirects fluid to these switches, and this is what controls different passages of fluid and the shifting. So when the fluid switches to this valve, it closes this switch, and it is actually an electrical switch. So when you have pressure here, it closes that switch and passes the current. So what we want to do is go through, use the resistance again. What I'm going to do is put the probe across these contacts, and I'll push down on it, close that switch. Now you can see the resistance is going to drop down to 0 because that switch is closed. So if we do the same thing over here, push down on this, and you'll see the resistance drop to 0 again, because that switch is closed. So I did already go through and check all of these. These are good, but that's how you would do the electrical testing on the valve body and make sure all the electrical components are good. All right, just to explain this again, so this is the pressure switch assembly. This goes on here. So these little membrane switches line up with these holes here. So this plug is like an output from these switches. So when you move the manual valve based on your shift lever position, you're changing the way the fluid is moving inside the valve body, which is in turn opening and closing these switches and sending an output to control different parts of the transmission and giving you your shifting. So next I want to get this plate off of here. So we're going to take this 3rd and 4th accumulator off. So this is the housing, just 6 8mm bolts. Try to keep this stuff all together. Take the springs out. This plate will just pop right off. So this thing is actually pretty dirty, so I'm glad I took this apart. I'll probably get a new one of these plates when I get the kit, but look at how dirty this stuff is. This is like just gobs and gobs of black junk. This is like thick stuff in here. So glad we're taking this thing apart. It's just really, really thick junk, and a lot of this fluid looks like there's metal shavings in it. So interested to see when we get deeper into the trans and see what we got going on in there. I'm gonna start to clean some of this stuff up. So what I'm gonna do for this portion, this is probably not a very scientific testing method here, but I'm going to just make sure that all of these little rods inside here move around when I push on them, and they move freely. So like this one right here. This moves nice and free on the spring. Doesn't seem like there's any issues. I did test all the solenoids already, so I confirmed that those are fine. There's also a little filter down here. This thing is nice and clean, so I don't really have to worry about that. Like, look at this gob of goo right here. There's just thick black stuff all over the place. All right, so that's about it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna just work on getting this stuff cleaned up and then set it off to the side, and then we'll start working on the teardown of the major components inside here. So we'll go through, rip everything out piece by piece, talk a little bit about what it is, then we'll go into a little bit more of a detailed breakdown of how to disassemble each part and find what's bad. So be sure to leave a comment. Let me know if you guys are enjoying this. Have a good night.